Welcome to STAAR Mix 3. We're going to be discussing the structure of cells and cover some of the various types of cells. We're also going to talk about the functions of each of the organelles and how they are unique to those cells. Then we're going to wrap up with a discussion on how and why cells differentiate. I've included here a list of vocabulary words that we're going to go over. I recommend reading through them and writing down the ones you don't recognize so you can focus on them. The ones you do recognize, remind yourself what they mean and why they're important. There are so many different forms of life, from the wiggling amoeba and pond water eating away to the weird squeezy tube looking Alina. There's also complex life, more complex like the fungus. It's multicellular with their spores and unique hyphae system. There's also the beautiful plants with their intricate structures. And if you're not noticing the theme yet, you should be. Every living thing begins with a cell. Some have more cells than others, and different organisms have different kinds of cells, but every living thing comes from cells. It's all about cells. We can summarize what we know of cells in 3 basic statements. First, all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. For example, bacteria and protists, like the wiggly little amoebas we just saw, are composed of one cell. You're composed of more than one cell. Second, the cell is the basic unit of organization of all living things. It's kind of like the Lego building brick to make the entire organism. Cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and the organ system makes up the whole organism. But it all begins with cells. Third, all cells come from a pre-existing cell. The first cells will divide, mitosis, in order to make new cells. Bacteria do it too, and it's called binary fission. So you've already seen that there are many types of cells. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to compare some of the differences between these cells. All living things are made of cells, but there's one basic division between cells. We're going to look at the classification of life in general later, but for this mix we are going to classify cells. The first thing that separates the 2 major types of cells is the presence or absence of a nucleus. All of your bacteria cells are called prokaryotes. They're prokaryotic cells. They do not have a nucleus. The word itself is formed from 2 parts, pro, which means before, and karyo, which means nucleus. So the word literally means before the nucleus. All life is thought to have originated from the bacteria cell. So before we had really advanced cells with nuclei, we had the prokaryotes, which didn't have nucleus. The second type of cell is the eukaryote. Eu means true or genuine. So this name breaks down into true cell. But I also like to remember the types of cells for the way the prefix sounds. Pro means no nucleus, and eu means you. You have a nucleus. Your cells are eukaryotic, but really every organism that is living and is not a bacteria is eukaryotic. So a plant is, and a fungus is, even those wiggly little single cells that I just showed you are eukaryotic because they have a nucleus. So we're going to summarize the differences between the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. And I want you to fill out the sheet as we go. So do prokaryotes have a nucleus? Do eukaryotes? What about a cell membrane? That's kind of tough, right? I mean, we'll make it simple. All cells have a membrane. They have to. All cells need to maintain homeostasis, or they need to maintain the balance between the inside and outside of their cell. They need to be able to control what goes in and what goes out. So having a cell membrane is part of being a cell. What about cytoplasm? Do they have cytoplasm? Yes, cytoplasm is also one of those essential things that all cells have to have. Cytoplasm consists of this really soft kind of jello-like substance called cytosol, and then all the rest of the contents of the cell. Altogether, that's referred to as the cytoplasm. This cytosol material is really important. It's important because it kind of cushions and suspends all of your organelles in the cytoplasm. Okay, so what about genetic material? Well, yes, in order to be an organism, you have to have genetic material, DNA and RNA. This is how organisms reproduce and pass on information, and it's also how they code for proteins. Speaking of proteins, how do you make them? What major organelle do you need? You need the ribosome. Yes, all cells have ribosomes. What about more complicated things like mitochondria, the membrane-bound organelles? Well, no, bacteria are very simple and for the most part consist of DNA and RNA, ribosomes, cytoplasm, and a cell membrane. That's it, just those parts. Eukaryotes are much more complex, and we're going to go over some of their more specialized organelles now. We are going to go over each of the organelles, but we're going to start with those structures and organelles that prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells share. The first one is the plasma membrane, and all cells require this semi-permeable membrane in order to maintain homeostasis in the cell. We're going to talk more about this in the next video. Next is the cell wall. Whether or not a cell has a cell wall is very tricky. I will focus more on that during taxonomy, but I do want to mention the purpose of this very unique structure. Most bacteria have a cell wall, not all, but most, and this cell wall is crucial in maintaining the support and integrity of the bacteria cell. If you puncture the cell wall with something like an antibiotic, for example, the cell will collapse and it'll die. Cell walls are also found in many eukaryotes. Plants also have cell walls. Here, the cell wall is also used for support. The cell wall of plants is made of cellulose, which is a carbohydrate. There are still other eukaryotes that have cell walls, like the fungus. The fungus cell wall is made of chitin, which is also a very strong carbohydrate. Animal cells do not have cell walls. Again, we're going to talk more about cells and cell walls in the taxonomy video. As I mentioned before, all cells must have ribosomes. All living things are made of proteins, and you cannot make proteins without them. If you need a quick refresher on the purpose of proteins, pause the video and reread through that. Proteins are very important. From here on, we're going to focus on organelles that are only in eukaryotic cells. The first one is the nucleus. This is the boss of the cell and contains the master code for genetic information of the organism. All cells within the organism will have the same genetic information in each nucleus. The nucleus is made of two parts, the outer nucleus with the nuclear pores where the mRNA will leave once it's made. The other section deeper inside is the nucleolus, and this is where the ribosomes or RNA is made. The next organelle is the lysosome. The lysosome acts to digest dying organelles and other waste within the cell. They contain digestive enzymes to assist with this. So it's considered an enzyme-packed wrecking ball of the cell. There are two parts to your endoplasmic reticulum, or ER. The first one is the smooth ER. The main function of the smooth ER is to synthesize lipids. Remember, synthesize means to create or build. Your lipids are your fats and your oils. I like to remember that fats and oils are smooth, and so they are made in the smooth ER. The second type of ER is the rough ER. It's called this because it's covered with attached ribosomes, giving it a rough appearance. These are your membrane-bound ribosomes because they'll have a membrane around them, and they're also responsible for a lot of the protein production within the cell. This picture shows very few ribosomes attached, but actually it's very deceiving because there's upwards of 13 million ribosomes attached to your rough ER. And then there's others scattered throughout your cytoplasm. And again, the main function of these, the rough ER, is to hold these ribosomes and produce proteins. The Golgi body, or Golgi apparatus, works to package proteins within your cell. As your ribosomes create proteins, your Golgi body packages them much like a post office would, and then it sends them where they need to go. The next organelle is the vacuole, and the vacuole functions as the main storage place of the cell. It's very different in plants and animals. Plants have one central vacuole that is very large and filled with water. Animal cells have many smaller vacuoles. Now, the function of the vacuoles in these two cells is slightly different as well. In animal cells, the vacuoles can act almost like lysosomes, while in plant cells, they actually provide support through something called turgor pressure. Basically, when the plant gets plenty of water, it's able to stay upright due to the water pressure of the vacuole within the cell. Have you ever seen like a droopy plant and then given it some water and it seems like it kind of perks up? Well, basically, that's when the plant gets more water and it's able to fill the vacuoles and gain support pressure in the cells, and the plant tends to perk up. The mighty mitochondria is found in both plant and animal cells and is responsible for creating ATP, the energy molecule. It's nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell because of this function. It breaks down glucose and turns it into ATP, a chemical energy that you need in order to function. The more ATP, the more energy you have. Chloroplasts are a very unique organelle in that they are found in any cell that carries out photosynthesis. Typically, these cells are green, or the organism itself is green, where there is a concentration of these organelles. All plant cells have organelles, as well as the plant-like protists, including the algae. There's also bacteria called cyanobacteria that contain chloroplasts. In fact, scientists have theorized that cyanobacteria are responsible for the early rise in oxygen level on our planet. So keep in mind as we talk about specialized organelles like chloroplasts, that they are unique to how the cell functions and processes energy. Centrosomes are only found in animal cells. They are found near the nucleus of the animal cells and are formed from two centrioles. They provide structure for the cell and work to pull apart chromatids during mitosis. Well, that's it for our organelles. Let's do a quick check to see how much you've absorbed. What type of cell is this? How can you know? And why do all cells have ribosomes? Take a moment to think about these three questions and pause the video if you need to. So what do you think the function of this organelle is? And what do you think the little black dots are? What type of cell is this found in, eukaryotic or prokaryotic? As I mentioned at the beginning, living organisms can be made of single cells, such as bacteria and protists, or they can be multicellular, like plants, animals, and fungus. Unicellular organisms like bacteria are able to perform all life functions within a single cell. They can transport molecules, metabolize nutrients, and reproduce all within this one cell. But multicellular organisms cannot. Because of this, many cells in a complex multicelled organism take up unique functions that go beyond the standard functions of the organelles we discussed. The various types of cells are able to specialize. You can kind of think of it like picking a major in college. You can either do general studies, like the bacteria, or you can specialize in defending the body against invaders, like the white blood cell. Multicellular organisms need many different types of cells to carry out the same life processes. Each of these special types of cells has a different structure that helps it perform a specific function. Humans have many different types of cells with different jobs, such as blood cells that carry oxygen, and nerve cells that transmit signals to all parts of the body. Muscle cells specialize in the ability to stretch and contract and slide past each other. This helps your muscle tissue produce motion. There are 4 different types of bone cells, and they're able to create hard minerals or calcify to create fibrous structure that can support you and your muscles. They are specialized in providing protection and support. Cell differentiation is the process by which cells become specialized in order to perform different functions. Multicellular organisms begin as just one cell, a fertilized egg, growing from one single cell to trillions of specialized cells that perform different functions. It's a process that happens with the regulation of DNA and RNA. All somatic cells, or body cells in the body, have the same genetic material. Stem cells have the ability to express all genes, so a stem cell can become any type of specialized cell. A stem cell that has become specialized will have most of its genes switched off, and only the genes associated with the particular specialization switched on. For example, a liver cell will have the genes that code for form and function of a liver cell switched on, as you can see here in the picture. So you notice here we have a liver cell, and it's switched on. We have a skin cell here, and the light switch is off. And notice all the liver cells are on, but all the other genes for things like nerves and skin and muscle, they're all turned off. So this gene code is only displaying the functions of liver cells. So even though you have all the genetic material in that cell itself, only the genetic material for liver functions are turned on. The things that turn these other genes on and off in cells are called transcription factors. They work very much like flipping on or off a light switch. Even in a specialized liver cell, some genes can be switched off when the protein they code for is not needed. Just imagine binge eating session of high sugar foods. The liver must respond by increasing certain metabolic functions that will enable the sugar to be taken out of the blood and stored. Proteins that do this need to be produced in a great number, and here's where the genes that code for these proteins must be switched on, and immediately the situation calms down. Once it's all calmed down, the genes can be switched off again. There are examples of this type of regulation throughout all of the body's organ systems, and we're going to go into more detail with that with human systems and plant system regulation later on. But animal cells are not the only ones that differentiate. All multicellular organisms have to have cell specialization. Plants have three basic organ systems: the roots, the transport, and the leaf system, and each of these have specialized differentiated cells. There are three different types of specialized cells that we're going to focus on. Xylem and phloem are the plant's transport cells. Xylem is specialized in transporting water throughout the plant, while the phloem is specialized in moving sugars through the plant system. Xylem and phloem don't carry out photosynthesis. They have their job, and the plant cannot function without this transportation system. Outside the transport tissue ring is the parenchyma cells. Most of the plant is made up of parenchyma cells. They're considered loosely specialized, as they carry out many different types of functions. The main function of them is photosynthesis, but they also can assist in storage. Take a look at these specialized xylem and phloem. Can you tell the difference between the two? Now look at the parenchyma cells and the bright green chloroplast. Each of the cells carry out a specific function required for photosynthesis. The parenchyma collects the light energy in the chloroplast, and the xylem brings the water, and then the phloem carries away the produced sugar. Each of these cells are highly specialized. The parenchyma, while loosely specialized, is still required for photosynthesis. None of these things would be transported without the transport tissues of the xylem and phloem. This concludes Mix 3 in cells and cell specialization. You're now ready to move on to Mix 4.